All right.
There's a lot of room up here, yeah. So, hi, I'm Pam. I'm Pam Stranahan. I think I know everybody in the room, or certainly met the last people that walked in, it's very exciting. So I have been here at the History Center for the last 15 years that the History Center's been in existence, and became involved with it when we retired down here from Houston. I've got a master's in history, and so history has been what's been fascinating to me all my life. I've always enjoyed learning about it, and learning about things around here were amazing. And now, of course, with America 250, we wanted to look into things and see how does this area or Texas connect to the American Revolution. And so I'm sure maybe some of you have been reading or at least seeing stuff on TV that tells you about it. And so to make the connection, we put up an exhibit, and what I'm going to talk about is actually on the posters that you'll see around the room, but it's always more interesting, I think, to hear the story, because you can read the posters and see some of the photographs or other parts of the story, but just to hear it related makes a big difference, I think. And so that's what I'm going to do today. The other part of this, and I was just talking to Andrew, who is a Canary Islander, descendant of the Canary Islanders, who were very much involved in this as part of the Spanish groups that were over here. But Spain does not get very much credit for helping with the American Revolution. You always hear about the French coming in, the French helping both by having actually soldiers, but mainly leaders, and then the French bring the fleet up that blocks that last big battle at Yorktown, and it blocks the British leaving. But what they don't say is that the Spanish gave the French the funds to be able to do that. It's just amazing. The more I read, the more the story of what France's involvement in became. So I'll probably repeat myself, but that's basically the story. And I depended on this book, which is really, really interesting. There are a number of books about it all, but I depended on this book called Galvez, and it was written by a judge who was a judge down in the valley in Harlingen, and a descendant of the Spanish royalty. And so he got interested in it, and he felt that Galvez had not gotten his due. And so he spent a lot of time lobbying for all kinds of things for Galvez, until finally, just 10 years ago in 2014, he got Galvez made a honorary U.S. citizen. And there are only 7 people that have ever gotten that honor, like Winston Churchill and Mahatma Gandhi and Mother Teresa. And so getting Galvez in that company was, a big feat that he did. And he spent a lot of time finding the documents, bringing forward, and taking it to Spain. So he was really on a mission. And he also wanted to be sure that everybody who had been a part of this here in Texas knew that they could be a son or a daughter of the American Revolution. So he really spent a lot of time encouraging people in those lineage societies, and it's very, very interesting. So let me just do this story for you. It's one that really deserves retelling. So first of all, we have to kind of look at this, even though I just have a map of the U.S., we have to think about this as being a world war. And often we don't. We just think about it being the colonies against England, against the King of England, George. Everybody knows we were against George III. But it's really all part of a worldwide system. And there was a lot of fighting that had been going on in Europe over the years, back and forth, back and forth. and different people, of course, aligned with different countries. And many of the royalty were related. And as you'll see, as we get into this, the King of Spain's nephew is King of France, okay? So there's a lot going on. But basically, we have what was called the French and Indian War. It really wasn't so much about the Indians, but the treaty for that was 1763, and what happened was England gets all of this area that's shown in gray up here. The French are pushed back into Canada, and Spain gets all of this territory that you see from the Mississippi West. And that sort of sets up the story. All of this is British. The Spanish territory comes on around here to what we call the Panhandle of Florida. So that's the territory that we're looking at as the American Revolution starts to become, something that's important too. And we're going to see throughout this that the different European countries are supporting the rebels when they can. And yet, because of diplomacy and just because of the situation, they're not willing to do it up front, and that's what goes on. So we have the Bourbon family of Spain, and they had all the wealth. When you think about it, they had not only all this territory that I just showed you, but from that territory they got the silver out of Mexico. They had the gold and silver out of Peru, okay? And then they had the Caribbean islands. They also had the Philippines for the spice trade. So Spain was a huge power, a huge naval power. And that's the other thing that's so intriguing to me is these ships. And that was the last thing I was reading about this morning, but the ships and how they correspond, how they communicate with each other is still just a mystery to me, the more I read about it. But we've got the King Carlos III, and so he is on the throne of Spain, and he began to say, we're gonna help the rebels, but we can't do it officially, okay? So even as Galvez, who's our principal character here, is being sent from Spain over to the Caribbean islands first, he meets with his relative, really. This is like his great-great-uncle. And so he meets with him, and the king tells Galvez, now, you can do whatever you can to help the rebels, but you can't do it officially. It can't be an official act, so it's got to be quiet. But he knows that he's going to be responsible for doing something. Galvez knows he's going to have to do something. And we'll look at what goes on even before this declaration. But remember, we're talking about, we always focus, and this year especially, we're focusing on 1776 as the American Revolution. That's only the start of it. It goes on until 1783, okay? So we've got like 9 years in there, or eight or 9 years, that George Washington was never home. I mean, he was not home during that time. He's with the troops. But all the while, many, many other things are going on. So while the Declaration of Independence happens in 1776, there's a lot that goes on, and finally then in 1779, the King Carlos declares war against Great Britain. So he becomes open about what is going to be going on at that particular point. And that again frees up a lot more money, a lot more troops, a lot more ships. So when you look at this map, the main thing that you want to look at here is the Mississippi River and the Ohio River, okay? And that was controlled at the beginning of this by the British, okay? And it was very, very important because if the British maintained control of those rivers, then they were cutting off the supplies that might go for the American Revolution. What was happening up here was fighting that was going on between the British, who had a lot of forts all along the Mississippi River. So the fighting was going on up here, and they needed to get supplies, and the Ohio River could also supply troops to George Washington and all of his troops that are fighting on way over here on the East Coast. So we forget how important this Mississippi really was to everybody. So at this point, Bernardo de Galvez has been made Spanish governor of Louisiana, okay, because Spain still controlled New Orleans and all of this lower territory that you see here, and then of course all of the territory to the west. Okay, so he's sent to be governor of Louisiana, as it was called, but Louisiana, excuse me, went all the way to the Arctic. Wow. I read in one thing. If you want to picture it that way, you can begin to get that. But we know that there was a secret corporation set up in Spain that would get the money from the king, okay, and then it would send money to Havana and supplies to Havana. I started reading all of these lists, and it's just more than you can imagine. You know, it's just guns, it's cannons, you know, it's clothing, it's tents. I mean, it's everything that they might need. So this is the way the Spaniards were doing it at the time, with this secret private company, because diplomatically they didn't want to be responsible. Okay, so they couldn't do it outright. So this was how they began to set that up. And then they also loaned money to both the Americans, the rebels, and the French. So whenever anything happened, they were still supplying all this wonderful Spanish coin, okay? And that Spanish coin is all that silver and gold that they've been mining, that they had to be able to do this kind of assistance with it. So what Galvez did, as soon as he's appointed right here in New Orleans to start managing things, he starts building up his troops. And he starts building up his ships in Havana. So he's got two bases of operation in New Orleans. And one of the books that I read talks a lot about him having not only Spanish soldiers who had been sent over, but also French. Okay, a few French troops were included. He attracted Indians who wanted to get paid. Okay, and slaves, okay, and free blacks. So they talk about his having, you know, a lot of different people involved in this, and they really sort of bill it as the first multinational force that existed. So this is one of the features of his troops that he's going to command while he's worrying about how he can help the American forces at that time. So how do we connect Galvez with Texas? And I think probably you know this story, but he had all of his troops in New Orleans, and he had a lot of troops. He had like 4,000 to 6,000 troops, 4,000 to 6,000 men to feed. And so he was running out of food, and he didn't know what he was going to be able to do next. But as a youth, he had been sent to West Texas, okay, as a Spanish soldier. So he already knew about the whole mission system here in Texas, and the fact that each of the missions had ranches. And that's not all. Some of the mission territories were also settled by Spaniards who just had their own independent ranches. Okay, so he's not just thinking about the mission ranches, which are extensive, but he's also thinking about individual ranches as well. So he knows where there's a lot of cattle, and he's able to then call those in to get them to New Orleans. So he sends a messenger in June, and even within a month, by August, they had put together 2,000 cattle that are going to move from there, from San Antonio, and they're going to go here, near to us. I always think about Goliad as being part of our territory. So they're going to come from San Antonio to Goliad. Of course, neither one of them are called that. So it's from there, okay, over to La Bahia. And then from La Bahia, they go north to Nacogdoches, okay, over to Natchitoches, which was a French settlement, and then down to Opelousas, okay, which will be pretty close to the Mississippi River. So you can get on down to New Orleans. Now in my head, I'm thinking, well, why did he do that? Why did he make this route, which is going to be like this? Here's Natchitoches, okay, so he's coming all this way. And why didn't he just cut across here? Why didn't he just go on the route that we use today as I-10, right?
Why not by ship?
Yeah, or by ship, why not? Anyway, he didn't. This is the way they sent him. And one source that I read said he didn't send him that way because of the Indians. Okay, so that would have been the Karankawa tribes that were local and had a bad reputation. And so I thought it was just because if you think about I-10, today we have a lot of bridges, right? We have that gets you across all that marshy area, and I just thought that would have been a really hard route for him to go on. But what I read said it was really mainly to stay out of the Indians. So that was the path that these vaqueros began to go. And then between that first start in 1779 and 1782, they estimate that between 10 and 15,000 cattle were sent over to feed the troops that Galvez had assembled mainly in the New Orleans area at that point. And the point that's really interesting, I was talking with Andrew about it earlier, but it's not just the missions. It's all of the ranches along the San Antonio River. And if you can picture the San Antonio River and how it flows in your mind, it starts up out a little bit north of San Antonio, and then it comes all the way down, all the way, and hits the Guadalupe just a little bit above Tyvola, okay, and then it's Guadalupe after that. But all along the San Antonio River were 65 ranchos, okay, and those are individual families, Spanish families that are individuals that are willing to put their cattle in with all the mission cattle too, and make contributions. So the King of Spain also asked them all to contribute, and the average amount was something like 13 reals or pesos. So it was a big contribution that the ranches and the soldiers and the administrators of the Spanish made to this whole effort. So we had a really big push through Texas. Now I'm only talking about Texas today, but some of this was also going on out in California. We forget that. California had something like 15 settlements all along the coast that are Spanish, okay? And so they're on alert too. They don't know if the British are coming by water, by sea, by the Pacific Ocean, okay? Captain Cook had already been sailing out in the Pacific, okay? And they didn't realize he'd been killed in the islands, but they didn't know, the Spanish didn't know if the British might be attacking them from the Pacific Ocean. So all of the missions and the ranch people in California were on alert out there. They never really got involved in the revolution, but they were expecting that it might happen. Okay, so when we hear about all that Galvez did, to me it's just amazing, because he was the commander and he was in charge of the soldiers, and he had to depend on the Navy. So he was always, but he was above the Navy as far as the hierarchy went. So he could order the Navy to do what he needed. And again, he was operating largely out of Havana and out of New Orleans. So those were his two bases of operation. But he sees, and everybody knows, that what needs to happen is to get the British off of the Mississippi River. Because if they can close the Mississippi River to trade and traffic, then the colonies and the colonists are going to be in trouble. They don't have that easy access. So he begins to do that, pushing the British out of the Mississippi. And this is 1779. Again, he's gotten supplies to feed his troops. He's got something like 4,000 to 6,000 troops that he has available to use. And he starts up the Mississippi River. And the first thing he goes to is a fort that was a small British fort called Manchac, and it's just out of New Orleans. Okay, so we're not going very far. And he takes 1,400 soldiers there and storms that fort and runs the British off. Now, they were not very happy about this, and they really didn't expect this to happen like this, so they're a little bit surprised. Next, he goes to Baton Rouge, and you probably know Baton Rouge is a location right on the Mississippi River. And so he tricks the British at that location, and he splits his forces. He's only taking 800 soldiers because he's left some of them to maintain this first fort. So he's at the second one. He splits them, and he sends a small group into the wooded area nearby, told them to make a lot of noise, shoot off the cannons, do whatever you need to do to let the British think that's where they're coming. And then he starts up with the other part of his troops and captures that fort. And then, really all he has to do for the next fort, which is at Natchez on the Mississippi, again, right on the Mississippi. All of these are major ports. All he has to do is send a messenger, okay, to the British at that port. And they say, okay, you can have it. It only took 2 days negotiation for him to get Natchez. So, by these three really already start to make the difference in who's controlling the Mississippi River. It was really impactful, very, very important. Now, he doesn't go on up the Mississippi River, but some of the Spanish forces do. They go on up and get a fort near St. Louis. They go on up as far as Detroit, okay, to get the British out. Those were the strongholds where the British had forts also. And so other Spanish troops, and I'm just not getting into that because I really wanted to focus on Galvez and Texas, but other troops go on up and clear the Mississippi all the way, okay, by 1780. So that made all the difference to what's going on the East Coast with Washington and the rebels who are fighting most of the battles that we hear about. Now, what amazed me was these ships. I mean, he's moving 800 men around. So, what are these ships like at sailing? I don't know. I'm a huge fan of Master and Commander. I don't know if you all like that movie, but I've not only seen the movie, I've read the book. I've read the book that it's based on, and then I've read about 10 books about the same admiral that goes around the world, and that's right around 1800. So we're not talking about too much later. Master and Commander, if you can picture that in your mind, that's what we're thinking about. But there is a battle in 1790, major battle near Cadiz, Spain. And what happens, the troops, the Navy, the Spanish Navy starts to leave Cadiz to come over to help in Havana, and on its way out, it runs into a British fleet, okay? And this is a huge British supply convoy with 63 ships in it, okay? I don't know how they do it exactly, but the Spanish capture 55 of those English ships, and that was a convoy that was headed over to help the British and the colonies, okay? So here we are, Spain is really, really involved in this in a major way. So this is the flagship of the Spanish fleet, and this is supposed to be a picture of it. But what amazed me when I started reading more about it, there were 4 decks, okay, 4 decks with guns, okay? And the lower deck, okay, the lower deck had the 32 pounders and the 24 pounders. That means what you send out of that cannon weighs 36 pounds. Now, I don't know about you, but I get my 5-pound bag of sugar for the Hummingbirds, and that's pretty heavy, okay? So when you picture that times 6 or 7, that's a big ordnance going off there. The next deck up had 24 pounders, 18 pounders, and 12 pounders. So your lowest, heaviest guns are on the bottom deck, okay? And then the next level. And then the last level was gonna just have small cannons, and they didn't even describe the bore of those, but small cannons and on the second deck, okay? And then the first deck was actually gonna be the deck that you think of as an open deck, and they would put those around if they could, okay, between the forecastle and the rest of the ship. So 4 decks of cannons, essentially. And I started thinking about how many people does it take, you know, for all of those guns. And it takes, you know, 3 people probably, because you've got your gun, you've got to get it back in position. And I was trying to find a picture that would really show me the decks of how these ships were loaded. But I didn't find one that I thought was satisfactory to really show you exactly how they had it. But this one even has portholes out the back, not portholes, but cannon holes out the back. So you had those cannon all the way around. And I looked at it, this ship, which is the Spanish ship that captured all those ships, actually ends up in the Battle of Trafalgar. And so even there, all of these ships, these sailing ships, are just in a mass, a clump, and firing at each other. I just can't imagine what this warfare was like. It would have been horrific. And remember, if you're a sailor or a soldier on these ships and your ship catches on fire, what do? You know, you hope you're close enough to shore to swim, I guess. Okay, so that I got all of a sudden I got off on the ships. Okay, but he had to have ships to be able to transport his troops between these different battles that we're finding so much information about. So the next big battle, he knows the British are controlling Mobile, even though you probably know Mobile was founded by the French, okay, right around 1700, but at this point it's British. Okay, so there are 300 British in the fort. He comes up with 12 ships with 750 men, plus he gets 1,400 reinforcements, and they lay siege to this for 2 months. And finally, they blasted through the walls of the fort, and they were able to go into it. So getting Mobile was a really important, big thing for them, because it was one of the major places, you know, that the British had set up and were able to, you know, really control things. The next area that he knew he wanted to go to was Pensacola. Pensacola, Florida was, again, a British, at this point British, even though it had been founded by the Spanish, okay, earlier, but now it's British, and so he knows he's got to get that. I'm going to just read this to you. This is the next part of the story. The horizontal rain peppering his face stung like 1,000 needles. The salt water burned his eyes and blurred his vision. The violent storm scattered his armada, and he could see none of his ships. His hands were bloody from holding on to the jackline made of coarse sisal rope. And the hurricane winds cracked the mizzenmast. His nose was broken by the wind and driven debris. The noise of that last sail exploding was ear-splitting. Pitching, rolling, and yawning, his ship was unable to make headway. The tempest winds rushing through the ship's rigging created an eerie, wailing sound. So he has assembled 60 ships and 4,000 men coming from Mobile, partly from Mobile and partly from Havana, going to Pensacola, which is not too much further east on the Gulf, and a huge hurricane catches him. It wrecks half of his fleet, kills half of his men, and they just limp back to Havana. That's all they can do. And so with that, he knows he's got to regroup. So he takes his rebuilding all through the springtime. And then in the spring, he starts back. And by that time, he's even got more men with him and more troops. One other piece that I was surprised to read, there's a whole contingency of Irishmen who are involved with him. Okay, so this is really an international force now that's going to come, that he's built up. So this time he returns with 7,800 soldiers, and he has, remember he's Army, okay, so he's on a Navy ship, and this is the scene supposedly. Damn it, Cavallo, order your fleet into the bay, Galvez shouted to no one in particular. Captain Calvo was in command of the Spanish fleet, and Calvo had the entire fleet jammed up at the entrance to Pensacola Bay. There was a narrow entrance between Santa Rosa Island and Perdido Key, both of which had British cannon bombarding the fleet, and Calvo's ship, the San Ramon, with 64 cannon, had grounded in the attempt to transit the straits. So Galvez is on another ship. By flag, Galvez ordered Calvo to hold his fleet fast. Calvo ordered his fleet to hold fast, citing the danger of those British guns. And imbecile, said Galvez when he received this message. So Galvez transferred his flag to the Galveston, that was another ship, and as governor, he was also commander of the Spanish forces from Louisiana. He sailed the Galveston through the channel, past the incredulous Calvo, watching from the quarterdeck in Pensacola Bay. Galvez was followed by 3 other Louisiana warships. Calvo, with a red face dripping with sweat, reluctantly ordered the remainder of the fleet to follow. The following day, he sent a message to Galvez saying he'd completed his mission of escorting him to Pensacola, and he was going back to Havana. So you can see some personal conflicts going on here as Galvez tries to do the maneuvers that he knows are really, really important. But he does, he says after that, yo solo, I did it myself, I did it alone. And he actually gets permission to put that on his crest, his family crest after that. So he took the credit. He felt like that was an important thing that he had done. But after weeks of fighting back and forth, it turns out that the Spanish hit just right, and they hit a huge part of the caisson, part of the store of the magazine with the powder for the guns and the cannons, and it blew a hole in the fort, and they were able then to get into the fort at Pensacola. They did have some French ships with them and French soldiers with them, sailors, and so Galvez paid them for their service to this part of the war, and that group then got repaired in Havana and then sailed up to the battle at Yorktown that you hear so much about, the French being a part of that. So the soldiers that were here at Pensacola end up being an important part of that on the East Coast. Okay, so what happens then is a new treaty. Okay, not that any of these hold for very long, but we've got a new treaty that was finally set up in 1783, and the map changes considerably. Spain gets all of this territory guaranteed west of the Mississippi River, and Florida, and some of the Caribbean islands. Actually, there's a trade between Great Britain and Spain for Cuba and for, I think, Bermuda. So Britain wants to keep some of their Caribbean islands, and so they make adjustments there. But Spain gets all of this territory legally in that sense. The United States is created all the way up to the Mississippi River, and the British keep Canada. So who really loses out in this without territory is France, but a considerable portion of it goes to Spain, as you can see here. Now, Bernardo Galvez himself is a really interesting character. Besides being the leader that I've related in what he's done, he was born in 1746 in Spain, and he went to the Spanish academy, military academy. So he's a trained soldier from the very beginning. And it doesn't hurt that his uncle is commander of the Indies. That's what it was called. That's what the New World was called at that time. He spent many years as a soldier, and he fought wars against Great Britain in Portugal, and then fought the Apaches in Mexico, as I referred to before, or it would have been, of course, New Spain, which is why he knew about all the cattle on the different ranches. He then became governor, the Spanish governor of Louisiana. That gave him, and remember, Louisiana was all the territory all west of the Mississippi River that was considered Louisiana. It wasn't just the state that we think about today. And he was the brigadier general that led his troops through all of these battles that I've related. Just an incident that I wanted to mention, I have a special connection, as Andrew was telling me about his Erie Islander ancestors. It turned out I have a Spanish soldier who was in Louisiana in 1799, so I feel like he was probably there before that. And a French great-grandmother whose family was there in 1720. When I started reading all of this, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got to go back now and find the details for all of them. After all of his battles, Galvez was made governor of New Spain and assigned to Mexico City. That was where he was going to run all of the Spanish territories that he had. But he became sick with a typhus epidemic in Mexico City, and he died in 1786. He was just 40 years old, which is amazing. He was supposed to have, even at that point, he had done a lot for the people of Mexico City. He started the major cathedral. He worked with the hospitals, and he was also integrating the different ethnic groups that lived in Mexico City into what he thought would be a better country. So he was really thought to be an outstanding administrator besides an outstanding soldier. So Galveston was named for Galvez, obviously, although a lot of people have not thought about that. Where did Galveston come from? It actually got named in 1786 when he sent a navigator to map the Texas coast. And so that navigator named the bay, and then the town becomes named for Galvez. And then, of course, the honor extends to the island or the town itself. So I mentioned earlier that in about 10 years ago, in 2014, the United States Congress gave him an honorary citizenship for his help during the Revolution. And there are many statues in Pensacola, not so much in Galveston. And the fellow that wrote this book was starting a campaign to try to get the funding to put a full-size statue of Galvez in Galveston. I don't know the result of that. But again, it's one of those things you wonder, why we weren't recognizing Galvez and the huge Spanish contribution to the American Revolution. With this America 250, we have an opportunity to really think about that again. So again, there are posters on the walls. This poster over here talks about the cattle drive. Over here about I Alone, his battles in the Gulf. And then there's another one on Galvez down